Welcome to the FCAN webinar, Winning Back Stopouts, Evidence-Based Approaches to Increasing College Re-Enrollment. Whoops. I am your host, Kathy McDonald, Assistant Director for Network Partnerships with the Florida College Access Network. I'm excited to welcome on the call today guest presenter Dr. Paul Perrault, who is Vice President of Research and Evaluation with the Helios Education Foundation. Dr. Perrault is charged with the development of a coordinated research and evaluation agenda at Helios. He comes to Helios with more than 10 years of research and evaluation experience. Prior to joining Helios, he was the research faculty member at the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan. Dr. Perrault received his PhD in Educational Foundations and Policy with a specialization in research methodology at the University of Michigan, along with 2 master's degrees. Also on our call today, I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Justin Ortegas, who's Assistant Professor of Higher Education Administration and Policy with the University of Florida's College of Education. Dr. Ortegas is also Director of the Institute of Higher Education at the University of Florida. His research typically examines the impact of online education, community colleges, and various state policies on the opportunities and outcomes of underserved college students. Before we get started today, a few housekeeping items. First, we welcome your questions. This is all about us learning together, so please submit your questions in the box that you should see on your dashboard on the right side of your computer if you're viewing from a desktop computer. We will allot time at the end of today's call for our guest presenters to answer questions, but you can submit them at any time, and I encourage you to do so. Second, please share what you're learning on your favorite social media platform. We love to hear what's resonating with you. On Twitter, you can find us at FL College Access. You can find Helios at Helios ED FND and Justin at Justin Ortegas. Please use the hashtag FCAN so we can find you. Finally, this webinar is being recorded and all materials will be shared and available within a week of the recording. For those of you who are interested in seeing the slides, you should see them in the handout section of your dashboard. Now, I know we have lots of new folks on that are listening in today from all over the country who may not be familiar with FCAN. So just a little bit about us. Florida College Access Network is the heart of a movement to ensure today's students are prepared for tomorrow's jobs. Our mission is to create and strengthen a statewide network that catalyzes and supports communities to improve college and career preparation, access, and completion for all students. Our vision is to see at least 60% of working age Floridians hold a high-quality post-secondary degree or credential by the year 2025. We do our work in 3 primary ways. Oops. Okay, all good here. FCAN publishes research and data on evidence-based practices and policy opportunities to strengthen Florida's talent pool. We also do our work through 17 local college access networks that represent 82% of the state's population. These organizations are made up of community leaders who come together to create solutions and partnerships to support local talent development. And finally, through our College Ready Florida statewide initiatives, FCAN coordinates 4 of them that support students in continuing their education after high school. Now, we know we've got folks logging in from lots of different organizations, so we would love to hear more about what type of organization you are with. So if you can go ahead and vote now, let us know if you are with a school district, a college or university, a community or college access organization, a philanthropic organization, or other, which could include government or business or workforce development, for instance. Give that another minute or 2 here. Okay. Great. Okay, so let's go ahead and share that out. It looks about a third are from colleges and universities, just shy of half is community and college access groups, and other. Great. Let us know if you're an other, if you don't mind putting in the question or the chat box what other you're with. Is that local government or some other type of organization? We'd love to know. Okay, so let's go ahead and hide that. And great. So as many of you know who have logged into FCAN webinars before, we've shared often that students often stop out of college for a variety of reasons, including life challenges with work, family, and finances. Many intend to return to college at a later date, but few do. Colleges and universities have been working hard to bring students back, though it can be challenging. Recently, Helios Education Foundation published findings from research that Paul and Justin conducted that examined strategies to increase college re-enrollment at 5 Florida colleges. They are joining us today with what they found from their research. And just so those of you who want to see the full-blown report, you can find that on Helios's website under their News and Media and Publications tab. Now, one more quick poll to see where you're with. And now we'd like to know, what are the top reasons you see that students are stopping out of college? And this one you can vote for as many as apply. So life challenges like health and family, finances like their aid ran out or lost a job or need a job, scheduling, they were struggling to get the classes when they need them, academic, or other. Let's give that another couple of seconds. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close that out. So for Paul and Justin, I'm not sure these results would surprise you, although it is a little bit of everything, but no surprise, finances is in the lead, followed close behind with life challenges. So thanks to everyone for sharing, what you're seeing in the field. And with that, let me turn the floor over to Paul. Okay, Paul, you should have controls. And with that, I look forward to hearing what you and Justin have to share with all of us today.
Thanks, Kathy. Good afternoon, everyone. And on behalf of Kathy, Justin, and myself, I would really like to thank you for taking time out of your busy day to join us. We know how hard all of you are working and appreciate your time today. We hope the information that we're about to share will be useful in your work, whatever position you're in, whether you're in a local college, whether you're in a community foundation, whether you're in any type of government or other organization that might be working with these types of students. I'd like to start out a little bit differently and talk a little bit about how Helios came together with the University of Florida and Justin to partner with this work, and how we're continuing to partner on this work going forward, especially since we have guests that might not know who Helios is or might even be out of state, and so they're not familiar with us. The Helios Education Foundation is a nonprofit located in both Arizona and Florida, and we operate around 4 belief statements. We believe education changes lives and strengthens communities. We believe education is an investment, not an expense. We believe every student, regardless of zip code, deserves a high-quality education. And we believe that we can achieve this mission through partnerships and collaboration. And in Florida, as part of those beliefs, we strive to have all students prepared for college and attend college if they choose to do so. So to achieve this goal, very lofty goal, Helios partners with community members around the state around projects that can help achieve it. In doing so, we often look for evidence-based practices that can have impacts to move the needle in Florida. But as you will hear throughout the presentation, and Justin can talk about a little bit in more detail, sometimes we find lots of groups and individuals are working on a number of approaches to improving post-secondary attainment and college going. But unfortunately, when we dig deeper to find out if they have really understood or looked into research and best practices, it kind of sometimes goes to crickets. A lot of time and energy is spent on focusing on these strategies. Less time is devoted to, are we making sure it really is working? Or are we just adding another layer on something that we're doing? And so, because so much of our work is aimed at getting kids ready to go to college and getting them complete, our collaboration with the University of Florida and Justin seemed to be a natural fit. The work we're going to talk about today is aimed at improving college persistence and completion for students who have stopped out. Students that actually made it to college, started going, had a certain number of credits, as you know, we'll talk about later. In this case, right around 30 credit hours. But for some reason, they left and they didn't complete. Moreover, the work is aimed at using research to measure just how large the impacts can be. So that if you took this work and implemented it in your college, or you partnered with a community college as an organization, or you were a local government that really wanted to implement this, that you would know what you could expect for having these results, that you would know that these results actually have a positive impact. We really want to be able to share that with you. So now switching to the problem. And you see it in this current slide up, really, we're highlighting a change in employment during recession and recovery from 2007 to 2016. And we highlight this from the current population survey. When you look at post-secondary attainment in Florida, one big problem that we see is there's a lot of people, students, however you want to talk about them, in Florida with some college or no degree. And that number, in fact, that number hovers around 20 to 23% of the population and can move up or down depending on if we're looking at race and ethnicity and disaggregating it that way. And so that's a major problem that we're seeing, is that we have, nearly at least 1/5 of the population that has gone to college, but for some reason has stopped out. But at the same time, right now we're dealing with a very strong economy that really has reduced unemployment both in Florida and across the United States. But while the economy is strong and has grown since the depths of the recession, one clear issue is that we must confront is that the bulk of these jobs have required a minimum of an associate's degree. And so this is what this graphic is really here to highlight here. So why we do see the economy growing and continuing to grow. If we look at this table 1, we can see that at least where this data goes up through 2016, the high school or less, during the recession period of 2007 to 2010, we lost about 5 million jobs. And only have recovered about 80,000 of those jobs when this data was done at 16. Now, when we start actually moving up that line to some college or associate's degree, we can see that even in the some college or associate's degree, we lost about 1,750,000 jobs. Recovered a lot better than the high school or less, at around 3 million jobs when this data came out and was released. But as we can continue to go up that line, look at the bachelor's degrees. We lost about 187,000 jobs, but really 8,400,000 jobs for that net change of 8,611,000 jobs from that recession period to now. So we are seeing that even though the economy is doing well, the future is really going to be in post-secondary attainment. And it's really going to be that associate's degree or higher. And as you can see, the shift is more and more towards a bachelor's degree. We've also learned a lot about college enrollments over time. And for a number of reasons, we often see that students from 2-year colleges are more often than not to drop out of college and not complete for a number of reasons. And we're not going to get into those reasons here, but what we want to do is highlight why we are so engaged in this work and why we really wanted to dig deeper. The chart that you see in front of you, figure 1, is basically 6-year outcomes for all students, students who started at 4-year institutions and students who started at 2-year institutions. And it's a 6-year look. And this data, this was actually done by the National Student Clearinghouse, the National Student Clearinghouse. And you can see there, they have the overall, the 4-year institutions and 2-year institutions. Just wanted to highlight some of the big takeaways from this. A little over the 2/3, or about 68% of all students in 4-year institutions graduate within 6 years. And that's a pretty good number, but we still are seeing about 1/3 of students who go to those 4-year institutions in 150% time are not finishing. So they're going there, either taking out loans or investing money in college credits and then leaving without a degree. But in contrast, only about 40% or 39% really of students in 2-year institutions do the same in the amount of time. And typically, you're thinking a 2-year institution. If we did this at 150%, we would only be looking at 3 years instead of 6. So in those 2-year institutions, seeing big differences in the amount of students that are persisting and completing. When we just aggregate those numbers by race and ethnicity to save time, we didn't do that. We see even bigger differences. So, for low income, minority students, first generation students, we see them graduating at a much lower rate and taking longer to graduate if they do. So this means that a lot of students leave college with some credits, but don't degree. And as we saw, though, the job market and the economy is pushing for more students, more people to enter the workforce that have at least that associate's degree or higher. And so naturally, this connects to the work that Justin has been leading at the University of Florida, and the work focused on really how do we bring students back in this category that have some college education but didn't finish. How do we bring them back? Because they're about 1/5 of the state, or 20% that you could think about. If we had 5 people standing in front of us, one of those people most likely has some college but dropped out and didn't finish for some reason. So if we're really going to actually impact the economy in Florida, get more students prepared, how do we think about this one group of students that have gone to college but for some reason stopped out? So with that, I'm going to switch this over to Justin, and so he can really talk about how we can improve post-secondary completion of students who have stopped out.
Thank you, Paul. I apologize. You all are stuck with me for a little while here. The one thing I do want to say briefly is I want to acknowledge first my co-authors, Isaac McFarland and Melvin Tanner, for a lot of the work we are producing related to this experiment we're going to discuss today, and some of the subsequent work related to that. Paul, of course, is a great co-author on the policy brief as well. Of course, Helios Education Foundation for allowing this project to move forward and become a reality. A lot of resources and time is needed to do such an initiative, and that this is only possible because of Helios and the support they offer, not only the Institute of Higher Education, but myself to kind of move forward with the project. So we can go to the next slide. Basically, what we're going to talk about today is a re-enrollment campaign. And while I'm in the acknowledgement business, I also want to acknowledge the 5 partner institutions. So Broward, Hillsborough, Miami-Dade, Palm Beach State, as well as Valencia College, because obviously this is a research practice partnership, and you really need the community colleges to be, or the Florida college system institutions to be bought in that way. The general logic of what we're going to talk about here today is that whenever we were talking with state leaders, administrators, etc., one problem kind of came to the surface, and this really was a lot of students are leaving college and it's not related to their coursework. So they're doing well academically, they're making significant progress toward a degree, but for whatever reason, they either dropped out or stopped out of their kind of college experience. And this was obviously very troubling given the numbers that Paul just referenced, when shy of 40% of students who start at a community college end up completing a degree. So what we decided to do was, okay, how can we kind of get to the field and kind of learn more about this? And we found out that a lot of community colleges are doing different types of campaigns to engage these students. So they would write letters, they would have calling campaigns, they would send emails, text messages. There was one famous one where a gentleman would go on a motorcycle and go to the campuses. And this is really kind of interesting and emblematic of people who really care a lot and are trying to do right by the students and get them to come back, but don't necessarily know what works and what is effective in doing so. And this is kind of where a research arm or a kind of partner institution can come in, like the University of Florida and myself and our research team, and hopefully provide some value in that way through an intervention. So I already acknowledged the colleges as well as my co-authors and Helios. So I want to briefly talk about the nuts and bolts of what this study entailed. So first and foremost, to be a student who's included in this study, to be included in this re-enrollment campaign, and I'll talk about momentarily what specifically we did, there were a few criteria. First and foremost, you needed to have 30 credit hours. You needed to have a 2.0 GPA or better. Whenever I went to the colleges, I would say, okay, so we're good on the criteria. And someone said, well, if they have a financial or behavioral hold, they can't re-enroll. So I would say, okay, then we got to include that as a piece of the criteria because we want them to be eligible to come back to college, obviously. So no holds were allowed. And obviously, we want to focus on the recent non-completers to give a greater likelihood of success for the initiative, for the college, the resources involved, etc. So whenever you take all that together and kind of look at what's left over, one more quick point, you need to have a working cell phone number, because this is a text messaging campaign, which I'll talk about momentarily. And in order for us to be able to send you a text message, you need a working cell phone number. So when you took all those different criteria together, a little over 27,000 former students represent the sample of the study. Okay, I'm ready to go. To the next slide. We need like a code word, like zucchini or something, and then I'm ready to go. So the intervention design, these students are going to be randomly assigned into one of three groups. And like I said, the intervention is rooted in trying to address types of barriers through a text messaging campaign. And I'll talk about very briefly those barriers before speaking specifically to the intervention design. Two types of barriers are really identified in the academic literature as far as really being problematic for students who want to continue on and graduate with a degree. First are information barriers, so whether it's advising or what to do next or what to do with the degree, how to kind of re-enroll. These information barriers are really critical to students, many of whom, when we're talking about community colleges, are low-income students, first-generation students, oftentimes adult students who are time constrained or taking developmental coursework if that's something that's needed. So these are students who can really kind of use guidance as far as next steps and how to get back into the fold as far as college. So information barrier is really key. And also, as you all kind of like nodded to with your poll answers, financial barriers are also really critical. So knowing that there are information barriers and financial barriers, really try to design an intervention that directly tackles those two specific barriers facing students that could be reasons as to why they leave college without completing their degree, even though it seemed like they were doing pretty well otherwise academically. So with those 27,000 students, we threw them into one of three groups according to random assignment. One is the control group, and that is very simply business as usual. And we would have colleges ask us, well, what if somebody calls from the control group? Do we still work with them in the same way? And the answer is absolutely. We want you to treat that student in the same way, try to get them to come back to college if they give you a ring. That is absolutely what we want you to do, as those colleges continually always try to optimize their academic outcomes and student engagement. So business as usual is the control group. The second group is focused solely on the information barriers. And what we found was whenever we would look at the 5 different colleges' websites, it really varied as what you needed to do to re-enroll. So we tried to simplify and streamline the re-enrollment process and combine that with the text messages I described earlier. So we would send a total of 10 text messages and let the student know, hey, we've simplified the process. We want you to come back, and really try to be mindful that if I'm receiving a text message from a random number, I'm just immediately going to think it's spam. So we would really, first and foremost, center the college communication. So Broward College wants you back. Miami-Dade College wants you back. So if you're a former student and you're getting a text message from a number, but you see, hey, this institution where I had 30 credit hours or more is contacting me, it's not out of the realm of possibilities, even though spam, to be honest, was a major concern of this type of initiative when you're text messaging folks who may not know you're going to text them before you do so. So we have the control group, business as usual, the information only group where we text you and send you to our custom website where we have simplified the re-enrollment process. And that website really is, we had a big button that said re-enroll now, another one that said, here's how you apply for financial aid. And if for any reason you had any questions, there's an assigned advisor and a phone number to communicate with that advisor. And that's really important to try to provide that critical information that students are looking to attain. I'll admit that sometimes it was more complicated to re-enroll depending on the institution, but we really tried to simplify it and say, click this button, you can re-enroll. And we really do want you to engage with the advisor. So here is the advisor contact information. The third and final intervention group is the information and financial incentive. Even if you have all the best kind of information in the world, sometimes we hear student stories that are just truly heartbreaking. They would say, we would love to come back to college. We can't afford gas to get to campus, and it's a financial issue. So we tried to really identify the extent to which these financial barriers are critical. So we would provide in our third group that same level of information, but we would say, if you decide to come back to college, the first course is on us, essentially, from a college perspective. And I really want to reiterate and note this. This is not a financial incentive that I provided or Helios provided. This was from the colleges, and they were really all in and trying to optimize the likelihood of re-enrollment. So they provided a waiver for the student over 9,000 different students were in this group as far as willing to cover the cost of that first course back if the student did decide to re-enroll. Now, without getting too much in the weeds, I will say there are different types of waivers. There are unconditional waivers where regardless of financial aid, we can potentially cut you a check for the equivalent of tuition. Or there are conditional waivers, which means if your financial aid does not already cover this, then at that point we'll cover that. We ran a bunch of tests and found that there was no distinct statistically significant difference in the types of waivers. So I'm just going to talk simply about a one-course tuition waiver moving forward. So to wrap up here, control group, business as usual. Information only treatment group is with the text message and the website. And the final group is all that same information, but we'll offer to pay for your first course back. Okay, ready for the next slide? So in addition to this causal work where we really tried to see what is the effect of this re-enrollment campaign, but we also wanted to know a little bit more. And this was really critical in talking to the colleges and knowing that they would like to know why folks left in the first place. So not just did this work to get them back, but why'd they leave? Can we be proactive in what we're doing moving forward to optimize the likelihood these students don't leave in the first place? Because it's a lot harder to get a student to come back who's already left college and hopefully just retain that student from an institutional perspective. So we sent a survey after we completed our data collection for the experiment and the intervention. We sent a survey to a little over 27,000 students, and we received responses from roughly 10%. As far as trying to identify why they left college. In subsequent work, we're going to talk in detail about why students left college. There's work led by myself and Dr. Ben Skinner as well, leading some of the survey work, who's an assistant professor at the University of Florida. But for now, we're just going to kind of hit the highlights and just note that work and kind of hit you with one slide later on, getting into some of those dynamics as to why folks left. And I also want to briefly reference, as I noted, a doctoral student here at the University of Florida, Melvin Tanner, really did just some unbelievable work for the qualitative interviews and interviewed one-on-one 112 former students and sat down with these students and said, why'd you leave? And for roughly 30 minutes each time, we kind of identified more reasons as to why folks left. And if you're wondering how we got 112 students to sit down with us, it's because we offered a $15 gift card as well if they were willing to sit down for the interview, and that is due to the generous support of Helios as well. Okay, and just to briefly note, because we offered the gift card for the interviews, over 1,000 students were willing to be interviewed, and we could not afford that necessarily. So what we did is we randomly kind of chose among students who were willing to be interviewed, and that's how we ended up with 112 from that random selection for those interviews. So all in all, we have this kind of like experiment. We're going to talk in detail about the findings, but did want to nod that we also looked at why students left college in the first place through the survey and this qualitative work as well. Okay. So here are the key findings for the intervention, the re-enrollment campaign we're talking about, whether you're in the control group, information group, or information, as well as a financial incentive. So of the roughly 27,000 students, just shy of 2,100 students re-enrolled in college. And you can see descriptively that the lowest number is obviously from the control group, more students descriptively re-enrolled from the information only group, and the largest number of students who re-enrolled in college were from the information and financial incentive group. And this did not necessarily look exactly the same across institutions. I just want to briefly note that we're providing big picture aggregated outcomes, but if an institution was already really engaged with re-enrollment to a greater extent than maybe another one was, the results will vary across institutions, but consistently across the different groupings in the overall sample, we're going to talk about the findings we found through this study. Okay. So basically, the main effect here for the information only group is whenever you take the pooled sample and you bring everyone together as far as what happened with this intervention, we found that information alone was not statistically significant. And it wasn't something we can say our information only campaign led to students re-enrolling. There wasn't a causal effect when we ran all our empirical models. So basically no effect. It's unrelated. So there was a slightly higher number, but we couldn't kind of like get down to X causes Y in this scenario. However, whenever we ran those same models, but we looked at the information and financial incentive, we found that students who received the information and financial treatment were 21% more likely to re-enroll in college relative to those students who did not receive the treatment. So that's a really important and significant effect when you think about how hard these students are to reach in the first place if they've already left college. So we found something here that can potentially move the needle in increasing the likelihood for students to re-enroll. And like I mentioned earlier, there are different types of waivers. The magnitude of the effect for the unconditional waiver was slightly higher, but without boring you to death with statistical talk, I'll just say we ran some interaction effects and there was no statistically significant difference in the type of waiver as I described. So we're just going to talk about one course waivers generally kind of moving forward. Okay. And this is really important. Community colleges and Florida college system institutions are really diverse, and different types of students may respond differently to interventions or campaigns or whatever it is you're doing from an intervention perspective. So we really wanted to see, do our findings vary according to a student's academic background, according to different kind of demographic characteristics? And, is this something that only works for certain subgroups of students? And if so, we'd like to know more about kind of that group and what that looks like. And what we found was across the different subgroups, the information-only treatment did not have a significant effect on re-enrollment. And this is really ties to a lot of the academic literature out there on informational nudges. And the key takeaway here is, if you have a really complicated problem, and a lot of smart people are really working hard and thinking about this problem in a deep way, but it's convoluted and it's really difficult to solve, a quick text message or a nudge may not solve that problem on its own. You may need some either wraparound supports or a financial incentive in our case to combine with the nudge to then have the optimal effect kind of moving forward. And this is in alignment with some recent literature, and it's also through the National Bureau of Economic Research, but also through the folks at University of Virginia. Ben Castleman are doing kind of work in this space, and they've kind of talked about that nudges alone are not necessarily working, as well as my colleague Kelly Rosinger at Penn State University involved with that study. So when we found that information only didn't work, and it's aligning with some of the other literature on nudges alone may not move the needle at scale, we wanted to see, okay, well, for whom is this working? When you talk about the financial incentive group combined with the information only treatment, so the information and financial treatment. And we found that for students who were further along, so they had the median number is 42 credit hours toward graduation. As we said, the minimum was 30 credit hours, but we found our sample in general that the median was 42 hours. Folks who were above that median, meaning they were closer to graduation, then they had a greater likelihood to re-enroll in college, which does make intuitive sense. If you're closer to the finish line, you're more likely to kind of re-enter the race. It just makes general logical sense. We also found, this was slightly surprising, that students who had a lower GPA were also more likely to re-enroll in college. So below a 3.0, they wanted to kind of, obviously above a 2.0, so they were completely eligible to re-enroll, but below a 3.0, they were more likely to re-enroll in college. And an important point here is, that we want to hit here is, we looked at different demographic groups as well, and this worked for low-income students and higher-income students. It worked for underrepresented minorities, so Black and Hispanic students, and it worked for white students. It worked for younger students and older students, etc. So across the different subgroups, the information and financial treatment had a statistically significant and positive effect on the likelihood to re-enroll in college. Okay. So one question that colleges had, and this is a very understandable kind of like concern, is, hey, if we invest some money and we really are already under-resourced and doing, more with less consistently year to year, if we invest this waiver, how do we know the student's not just going to take the course and hightail it out of here? That's not going to help us with our completion numbers. That's not going to help the student graduate. That's not going to help us with our performance funding initiative and trying to be responsive to different state policies. We want to know more about what happens once the student comes back. And we think that's an extremely understandable concern from the college perspective. So we ran some different models and really tried to look at, if the student did come back, are they more likely to take multiple courses? And are they also more likely to be a full-time student, which would be 12 credit hours or more? These were kind of key questions in response to what we found as a critical area of concern for the different community colleges with whom we partnered. So for the total sample, once again, the information-only treatment does not have a significant effect on students' likelihood to re-enroll in more than one course or their likelihood to re-enroll as a full-time student. However, if you look at the information and financial treatment, whether you would pay for the first course back for the student, students who received that nudge combined with that one course tuition waiver were 16% more likely to re-enroll in more than one course relative to their peers in the control group. And also, and this is really important when we know the academic literature out there on the positive benefits of being enrolled full-time as a student, former students who received an information and financial incentive are also 22% more likely to re-enroll as a full-time student. And this is based on the collaborative causal work I did again with Dr. Isaac McFarland and Melvin Tanner, which is currently a working paper as well. So these are some of the key takeaways for the causal design of the intervention, kind of moving forward and letting you know some of the key findings. Okay. I wanted to at least just kind of briefly allude to the survey findings, even though we don't have enough time to go in greater depth. But we found some patterns that emerge that are similar to some of the things you described, and also we think are add value to future practice and policy moving forward when trying to determine why former students left college in the first place. As you would imagine, based on the overwhelming response from the poll we saw earlier, financial struggles, the need to work, time constraints because they're forced to work, these are major reasons why students leave college. And we do ask in greater detail, but I'm just giving you a highlighted component there as far as what students were saying. Also, there were challenges with advising, and this was something that was admittedly surprising, and we tried to communicate this to the different colleges after the fact. Students who were going toward a degree sometimes would have very few credit hours left, and they literally could not take the course because they're working full time, and the course was only available during like working hours. So there wasn't available online as an example where they could even take the course. So these are obviously problems where if you think about the logic of course offerings, you could potentially be responsive to student need. And being that a community college has an overwhelmingly disproportionate number of students who are working and time constrained, this is a really important consideration to try to be strategic in offering critical required courses either online or face-to-face in a night, whatever the situation may be, but just being mindful that it can't only be available during working hours, given the student population at the individual Florida college system institutions. And third and finally, this kind of like broad bucket of reasons we were hearing were honestly for me surprising. Health came up several times. So they ran into some health issues and left. It's not that they wanted to leave, and this nudge and this incentive and this waiver kind of motivated them to kind of come back to college, even though they recently left due to issues that were beyond their control. And sometimes you just have life circumstances. You switch jobs, you become a full-time employee, not a part-time employee. These different types of dynamics can sometimes lead to kind of inconsistency in one's life that forces them to kind of stop out of college. And sometimes those students never come back, but hopefully with initiatives like we're describing here today, you can kind of like encourage these students to re-enroll if kind of life gets in the way, as we know can happen from time to time. Okay. So I'm briefly going to talk about a couple of our recommendations, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague here who's going to then get into some recommendations and next steps as well. So I'm going to really focus on the first two. Given that we know that informational nudges alone don't necessarily appear to work based on the academic literature, this finding here, et cetera, we really want to kind of stress the importance of a one course waiver that apparently makes financial sense as well. If they're enrolling in more than one course, you obviously generate revenue from that student from the additional coursework. Obviously, there's a public good component to improving your local economy by having folks with credentials. It benefits the student to increase their likelihood to come back and complete their degree. And as I mentioned earlier, with performance funding in the state of Florida, obviously community colleges are competing for scarce resources, and it just makes sense to try to optimize those completion numbers and have as many students graduate as possible. And as I mentioned, every partner institution with which we were working was all in on trying to identify ways to optimize those numbers and help students in every way possible. So because we found this tuition waiver appears to work, and this is so rare to offer causal evidence where we can say confidently, like it's not that we're not sure if the letter went out or if the call center worked or the email was read. We know this works. If you have the informational nudge and you kind of like try to simplify the process and you combine that with a one course tuition waiver, students are more likely to come back to college full stop. And this is really important and compelling information to kind of be mindful of moving forward from an institutional perspective. And then finally, really thinking through, is there an opportunity to increase online opportunities for required coursework for those students who are not only facing location constraints, like so many students at Florida college system institutions or community colleges nationally, but also facing time constraints? And can we find ways to serve these students in ways that just makes logical sense to offer coursework outside of normal working hours? And many colleges are already doing great work in this area, but trying to optimize those numbers moving forward, we think makes logical sense based on some of our survey and qualitative findings. And I'll now turn it over to Paul.
Thanks, Justin. To continue on, we know that some of these next couple recommendations require some more funding. They could require funding from the state. They could connect with funding from partnerships with local nonprofits or other organizations and communities to help community colleges around this too. But we're quite aware that these are not just make it happen right away. But we did connect it with the survey work and the overall work. One thing we wanted to highlight was increasing rainy day funds for more emergency scholarships. And as the polling showed earlier, all of you thought financial reasons were one big reasons for students to stop out of college going. And with the survey work here, that was the case for a number of students as well. And with some of those students, it really was that something came up, whether it was $1,000 car repair or a medical bill for a couple $1,000s that they had to pay off, or something else that really came in. They were having problem with rent. There was opportunities where that could have been solved if there was more of these what we call rainy day funds for emergency scholarships. We are starting to see more and other work that Helios has done with partners across Florida and across Arizona as well, that organizations are starting to jump in with these rainy day funds to help students persist so that they don't stop out, because if they continue to persist, they are much more likely to finish. There's been work, especially in Florida, with Florida Heart of the United Way that has emergency scholarship funds that they're working with institutions. If you're interested in that, that would be one route to look at. But maybe if there's other opportunities for increased state funding for this, or if the colleges can actually dedicate some additional funding in financial aid to these emergency scholarships, we truly believe that we'll see fewer students actually stop out when it comes to something that might be able to be fixed in one or two instances. The other final one is increased funding for more advisors and advising resources for the Florida college system. And I think that you see this goes through many of these. Even Justin talked about online opportunities for required coursework. Students also had a hard time just working with the advisors, getting enough information, getting that face-to-face time or telephone or online time to have that information. If there could be more advisors that could actually help students think through this, think them through some of the kind of course offerings and how to sequence them, how to make sure that they're not actually disenrolling or repeating classes, which has an impact on financial aid. It would really help the opportunities for those students to stay in and maybe not run out of financial aid opportunities. So really, these kind of 4 recommendations were the ones that really bubbled up to the surface. There's obviously more, there's other things that, that we'd love to fine tune and have an ability to talk about more, but these really developed across the 5 institutions and kind of were key to that information. Now, what we don't want to do is just to let this end. There's been too much great work here to simply just say, we did the work, we shared the information out, we're going to let it go. So one of the things is that we wanted to make sure that we have collaborative learning with the institutions and develop research practice partnerships to solve problems. So, how do we work with the 5 institutions, but how do we work with other colleges that are on this webinar today? How can we connect? How can we share these results more with you and your organizations? How can we share it with the universities and institutions and colleges within Florida and across the United States? That's a key thing that we want to really do, is have that collaborative learning, identify the needs, and actually be able to help you think through this and implement this and making sure. Now, one of the things that we haven't done yet that we want to follow through is the students might have came back for 1 semester. We might have got them to come back, or the work might have got them to come back. We really want to know, did it get them to the finish line? So, jointly, Helios and University of Florida, led by Justin and myself, are going to really follow these students. We're collecting the data over the next 24 months to see not only did these students come back and to college after these incentives, but did the intervention help them actually make it to the finish line? Did they persist and complete? And so we're going to really map that out over the next 24 months. And then we also want to follow up with some of those students. What could have helped them make it to the finish line? Was it the one class? What were the things that could have helped them get there? And for those students that actually did, how big, how important was that incentive to get them to come back, intermixed with the texting and that as well? We really want to make sure that we continue sharing this information through another of opportunities. Justin and I will be presenting this at the Florida College Access Network conference in May. So it'll be another opportunity to hear this plus additional information, and also to have more face-to-face opportunities for questions. And we work with the college system and the university system to make sure that we're sharing these results and these opportunities, so that other people that didn't make it to the webinar or the FCAN Summit can really have an opportunity to hear about this, learn about this, and maybe figure out how to implement it in one of their colleges or universities. With that, I'm going to shift this back to Kathy and give you everybody in the audience some opinities to ask us questions.
Can I go rogue for one moment here, Paul? Sorry.
Sure. Sorry, Justin.
It's okay. Just to go back to if we go back to the last slide, please. Really just trying to talk about this idea of collaborative learning. So at the University of Florida Institute of Higher Education, where I direct, we're really focusing on research practice partnerships. So if you think there's some ways in which interventions, or thinking through ways you want to learn more about your institution, best practices and policies, please do feel free to reach out. Like I said, my name is Justin Ortegas and I direct the Institute, and we're always looking for more partner institutions to do this type of work. And I wanted to give a quick kudos to the institutions one more time, our partner institutions, because they always ask, we want them to come back, but we want them to graduate. Are you willing to keep tracking these students and see if they actually end up getting the degree? And that's the whole kind of logical rationale behind what Paul was describing, and why we're going to kind of keep with this and providing that information to those institutions to let them know if the students persisted and then completed upon re-enrollment. So just wanted to hit those two quick points. Feel free to email me if you want to reach out, or kind of like touch base on Twitter, whatever it is. But I did want to give one last kudos to our partner institutions who were wonderful at every stage throughout this process. All right, sorry to go rogue there, Kathy.
No worries, Justin, no worries. Your partners are amazing. We're getting lots of great questions in, so I want to make sure we have time for them. Joe asked, were the specific challenges with advising that were noted besides course availability? And having read your report, I know one of the things was students were hearing different things from different advisors, but can you elaborate on some of those challenges?
Yeah, and I think the first thing to point out here is that there are capacity constraints, and if we say there's more funding needed, that's because community colleges are really stretched thin and trying to have very few advisors advise quite a few students, and it's just extremely challenging, and they're really under-resourced in every way. So it's incumbent on trying to optimize their likelihood to succeed, and they're doing great work. But what the students were saying is that sometimes they would have a tough time contacting an advisor. Sometimes we get conflicting information when talking to two advisors. And this type of thing happens when you're under-resourced. And this is something where we really want to try to optimize the likelihood of high quality advising, because that's what leads students to take the right classes, then persist in the program, then graduate in the course sequencing that Paul described earlier. Yeah, so that's kind of like some of the logical points that were being hit as far as advising and making students aware of next steps as far as other medium of instruction options as far as online courses as well.
It also makes me think of articulation, really strong articulation in guided pathways, the FUSE program between USF and HCC, for instance, which was one of the institutions you worked with. But I know USF has those partnerships with some of the other folks, some of the other colleges that feed into them. That's part of it, so that they aren't meandering off the path and taking classes that add to their total but not necessarily help them earn a credential. So those are some of those bigger solutions. Nalani is asking, thanks for this, to help understand the results of the 16% more likely to re-enroll with the one course waiver. Do you know the overall percentage of students who re-enroll?
Yeah, so essentially, I think what the 16% was for the more than one course. So 21% would re-enroll in general. I believe 16% was to enroll in more than one course, and 22% to enroll as a full-time student. Those control means were typically low, and that was, the control mean being the baseline of re-enrollment. Although we showed a total number of roughly 2,100 to the 2,700. I believe it was those control means usually hovered around 5%, 7%. It was a low proportion of folks who were actually re-enrolling, because this is a really, really, really hard group of students to reach, much less get them to then not only, because they've already decided they're going to either stop out or drop out depending if they decide to come back. So just naturally those percentages are going to be low. So anything you can do to optimize or improve that low percentage is kind of what we're trying to talk about here today.
Well, and one of the things that you and Paul talked about a few minutes ago is how do you try and catch them before they stop out? So Paul referenced the destination graduation, program that was started in Uplift Ed, which is our local college access network in Central Florida, where it wasn't just emergency aid, although that was an important piece of it, but it also was access to referral services, because there are many community organizations and agencies who have access to support for things like getting evicted or transportation or childcare or those other things, but students may not know about it. And so, making it easier for them to access some of those resources. I know that wasn't the focus of this study, but I wasn't sure if you heard about any of that in your qualitative surveys or interviews.
I wouldn't necessarily say that specifically is to give you like a nuanced answer directly in response to that, but I will say that the point I think that should be highlighted based on what you're referencing is the extreme significance and importance of wraparound services. So we think about future work. We've seen from work from CUNY ASAP, programs such as that provide wraparound services that have really positive effect on student outcomes. That the logic of those initiatives has been replicated, I believe, in 3 community colleges in the state of Ohio, and also had positive effects. So we're seeing a burgeoning body of evidence, the importance and the positive relationship between those wraparound types of services you're describing and then their subsequent academic outcomes. So it's not as simple as send a text, provide a waiver, and have a nice day. Of course, the good work those community colleges are doing will have to be heightened to optimize the likelihood that that student who already decided it wasn't for them continues, persists, and completes the degree, which of course is a challenge moving forward.
For sure, and that's where our partnerships with community organizations is so critical, and that's where Helios's support, certainly of our work and our LCANs throughout the state, is critical in helping to provide some of those supports that just quite frankly aren't part of a college or a university budget. Philip wanted to know if there's a summary report for this information that he can share with his administration. Yes, it's on Helios's website, but when we send out the follow-up with the recording and the slides, we'll share a link directly to that report on Helios's website. So you absolutely will have access to that. Elizabeth is asking, I'm curious to know if the research found stopped out students who had taken online certifications or additional courses at another institution, and if so, how transferable to State College were those credits? One effective way to win them back in college would be to award credit from documented prior learning. Yeah, absolutely.
I don't want to answer too many questions here, so I'll turn it over to Paul as well if he wants to add to this, but just very briefly, a condition of what we were doing was we also wanted to leverage National Student Clearinghouse data to see if students were enrolled elsewhere or took courses elsewhere or offered or gained credentials elsewhere. And obviously, if they've already enrolled somewhere else, they would not even be in our study. Let's just kind of play this out and say they were enrolled somewhere else, got some other credit hours from another institution in the state of Florida. Yes, based on the articulation agreement that Kathy referenced earlier for the Florida college system and the state university system, those courses are typically transferable. Now, without knowing the context of what certificate or what's being referenced there, it's challenging for me to say. You run into complications if it's not Florida or if it's private. Anything to add there, Paul?
Not really on that. I think that, you know, that was one of the things that we had talked about a little, maybe digging deeper into when we're looking at the ultimate persistence and completion, is having that additional data to see how those types of factors might have worked into that as well. So it's something that we've been thinking about, we've talked about, and something that we hope to dig into deeper as we get to the finish line.
And the shorter we can make it to the finish line for our students, you know, through things like prior learning assessments or portfolio credit is absolutely critical. Cedric just has a quick question by advisors. We're talking about academic or advisors or community-based advisors, and I'm assuming academic advisors specifically with regards to your research, correct?
Yes, and this was a student experiences. And just to hit like one more quick point, sometimes have you ever read like a Yelp review and the person who has the review is either extreme on one way or the other? So these colleges are doing really positive work the best they can with the advisors, but we're just kind of like highlighting the truthful answers that were replied by these students who said they ran into some complications with advising. So I certainly don't want the narrative to turn into something negative on advising. It's there are absolutely ways to improve advising at all institutions, and just trying to highlight that, given the importance of that component when thinking through how to optimize re-enrollment and then facilitate success once they re-enroll. But short answer, yes, it was academic advisors.
Okay, great. Horace asked a great question, especially since we have so many community organizations on the webinar today. What would be your suggestion for advisors at nonprofits looking to get students back in school? Should I be communicating with the schools attempting to see if they would offer tuition waivers?
Paul, do you have any insight to that one?
I mean, that's a really great question that I think we're going to need more examples of, and maybe that's something, Kathy, that FCAN can actually be a part of down the road, is how do you have those crucial conversations with the colleges? So I really think it's going to vary by right now LCANs or those community nonprofits, you know, with their relationships and who they have access to. So if you have access to those, you know, kind of like the enrollment and financial aid offices with some of the leadership there, how can you actually collaborate to have like a community discussion around those types of things too? So I think that, you know, and this is just starting out, you know, using this research as a base, if I was a local organization, I would take this to my local community college or college that I wanted to work with and say, hey, there's some really positive things happening out there. How, you know, what's the best way for us to navigate this at this college as well? So I think that is a challenge, and that, you know, we'll have to figure out different ways for people to navigate that process over time. And I think, you know, it's one of the reasons that we want to work with the universities, the university and college system, so that they might be able to develop that approach more as well.
Well, and the other thing that I love about what you all found through this research is a lot of times students will say things like, oh, I stepped out for finance reasons, or, you know, life reasons or whatever. But as your qualitative research found, it's really nuanced, and there's a lot of layers in there where, again, community partnerships can be so critical in terms of helping to meet some of those needs. So I know we're getting really close out of time, but Leslie's asking if you would mind sharing what type of language you shared specifically in your text nudges with students. I believe that's in the report, correct?
Yeah, that's in the report. Also, a couple quick answers to an earlier question about, is there like a really shortened version of this information? Inside Higher Ed did cover this study. We have a paper out in National Bureau of Economic Research, a working paper, and obviously that paper is going to have all the information, including all the listed text messages, a brief summary of our work on Inside Higher Ed, and if you want to go to Helios' site, the policy brief that was referenced earlier, we do provide examples, screenshots of the website, so you can see the design of what we thought were effective best practices with the websites, and really had really positive partners at UF and the College of Education with that work, and as well as the 10 text messages we sent to specific groups, whether you were the information only group or the information and financial treatment group as well.
All right. Well, we have a few more questions that unfortunately we did not have time to get to. I will shoot those to the presenters and we can reach out to you offline. Super quickly, Paul mentioned it earlier. Justin and Paul will be at our summit sharing this information again. So if you have colleagues who would like to see it, and or if you would like to connect live with them, as you heard from them, they are looking to connect on the next, future potential research. What are some areas we want to explore further? I encourage you to register now. The registration website is up and live. That's fcansummit.org. You'll find not only these, but many other great sessions like this with some, super interesting and evidence-based solutions to learn from. If you aren't already a subscriber to floridacollegeaccess.org at subscribe, I'd encourage you to do so. That way you'll hear about future webinars, policy briefs, and promising practices. With that, I wish you all a wonderful day. Many thanks to Paul and Justin for sharing their insights from their research and the critical work of bringing students back to completing a credential. Have a great day. Take care, all.
Take care now.
So do we hang out?